Hello, I'm Katy Barke. I'm Living Landscapes Projects Manager at Northumberland Wildlife Trust. I manage a team of people and projects in and around Kielder, including restoring Ratty, where we're bringing water bowls back to Kielder, and also the Kielder Head Wildwood Project, which is restoring a native upland woodland out in the wilds of Kielder. But today I'm going to talk to you about our ospreys. Now, I've been involved with the ospreys for a few years now, but I'm not the world's leading expert on ospreys, so I'll give you quite a gentle introduction to them, how they got there, what we're doing, and I'll also provide some resources for if you want to find out more around them. So the bird that we're looking at here, this is nest 7, which is our newest nest. Well, has the newest camera on it. These spectacular views of Kielder water in the background, and that's from earlier this year. So the Kielder Osprey Project. Kielder Osprey Project is delivered in partnership. It's between ourselves, Forestry England, Northumbrian Water, Calvert Kielder, and Kielder Water Forest Park Development Trust. So what is an osprey? Quite an important question. So the ospreys we have are the Western osprey. They are found everywhere but Antarctica, which is unusual for a land-dwelling bird. So there's a bit of debate about if there's more than one species. It's accepted that there are a number of subspecies. There's debate about whether the Western osprey is a distinct and separate species from the Eastern osprey. Some people still think it's all one species. But the Western osprey is what we're talking about. And as I say, they have a pan-global distribution. And they're obviously very closely associated with water. Because they not entirely exclusively fish, 99.99999% of their diet is fish. They have been observed in Africa eating small mammals and other things, probably in times when it's hard to find fish, but they've never been observed eating anything but fish in the UK. They're quite a big bird. They are up to 62 centimeters long, with a just shy of 2-meter wingspan. So that, you know, they are they are big birds, and the females are up to about 20% bigger than the males. So it's when you've got them sat on the nest together, you can generally tell which one's the female when they're obviously sat right next to each other. In flight and out and about, it's a bit more difficult, but females generally have a slightly darker band on their chest. But they are highly variable in their plumage. So obviously they've got this white head, white greyish underbelly and a brown back, but they have quite distinctive markings. And Joanna Daly, who is a wonderful volunteer at Kielder Osprey Project, who observes all the birds and looks at all the recordings from the nests and everything. And Joanna can tell the different birds apart, or some of them certainly by these sort of characteristics of their plumage and their feathers. But yeah, so the females are a bit bigger, and they are famously a migratory species. Now, for their fish-eating lifestyle, they have a number of adaptations. So they have reversible outer toes, which is usually found in owls. So their feet are more like owls' feet than sort of other birds of prey. And the underside of their toes have what we call spicules, which are like tiny little spikes. So it's a bit like sandpaper or like Velcro. It makes them very rough, which helps them with their grip when they're holding a very slippery fish. On the talons, which are cylindrical rather than flat. So most birds of prey, they're flat or they have like an indentation in them. Osprey talons are pretty much cylindrical. And they have these scales on them which face backwards, which again help them sort of hook into the fish and keep a good hold of it. And you know, the fish that they're catching, as you can see in that sequence, the fish can be almost as heavy as the bird. They can carry some sizable fish away with them, so they need to be able to keep a really good handle on it. And typically they'll also manipulate the fish so that it's head forward, which reduces the drag as they're flying and helps them carry these lots of fish away. They also, when they dive, they can close their nostrils to keep the water out, and they have, in common with lots of birds, this third eyelid, which acts kind of like, I suppose, a protective contact lens when they go underwater. That closes over. Again, that stops water coming in. Their feathers are very oily. They've got very dense plumage, and that stops them from getting waterlogged when they go into the water. And they can catch fish up to 1 meter below the surface. They either sort of dive from quite a big height, which is quite spectacular, and that's sort of the typical way you'll see them fish, this sudden dive down into the water, and then they catch the fish and off they go. Or sometimes they'll do a much more gentle swoop and just sort of pluck one out of the water, but the dive is typically what you see when they're hunting. I said they've been found around, you can find them around the globe, but in the UK, it's actually only fairly recently that we've had them back. So they were made extinct in England in 1840, and in Scotland in 1916 was the last record of a breeding pair. And they were sort of persecuted to extinction by egg collectors, by being shot for taxidermy, by people who just didn't want birds of prey around, the usual sort of things. So yeah, so they went extinct. And then in 1954, the first pair nested successfully in Scotland, and we think they came from Scandinavia. We don't know completely, but it's likely that's where they came from. And then it took a really long time for them to start to build a population. So it was only really a handful of successful nests, you know, up to the 70s and 80s. And then conservation practice changed, attitudes towards egg collecting changed, for example, and they've started to make a much better recovery. So we now have probably a couple of hundred nests in Scotland. There's still only a handful of places in England that have them, and just a few locations in Wales, and they're still not back at all on the on Ireland. Northern Ireland and Ireland don't have any ospreys yet. So they are a Schedule 1 species in the Wildlife and Conservation Act, which makes them sort of, they have the highest levels of protection. It's an offence basically to do anything, sort of interfere with their nests, to disturb them, anything like that. They're completely protected in law. But and they are an amber list bird of conservation concern. They still face threats, as sadly we've seen earlier this year in a Welsh nest. We saw, and it hit the national news, so I'm sure you know about it, but a nest being chainsawed down. And they're still trying to find out who did that and why, but threats include egg collecting, general persecution, people who don't want them around for whatever reason, habitat destruction and pollution. And that habitat destruction, pollution, it can be both here in the UK, but also in their wintering grounds. So obviously they're vulnerable where they spend the winter as well. But the map on the right hand side of the screen there, that's a distribution from the RSPB showing where you can find ospreys now. And hopefully as the years go on, there's just going to be more and more patches showing that they're, you know, making a recovery. And where's Kielder? So I appreciate that most people watching this are probably from Northumberland or are already familiar with the Kielder Ospreys, but it just helps to put it in the context of where we are. So Kielder Water Forest Park is right on the border with Scotland, pretty much bang in the middle, as you can see, so with that red pin in the middle there, right up on the border, and it is England's largest forest. So planting of Kielder Forest started in the 1920s. As a national strategic timber reserve. So it was sort of post First World War, the realization that we needed more timber. So this, what used to be sort of open grouse moor, farmed land, suddenly this huge drive to start planting trees, and it created this whole industry. And you know, there's lots of villages sprung up to house the foresters and the workers. And now, as we say, it's England's largest forest. It also has on top of that the biggest man-made lake in Northern Europe, Kielder Reservoir, which started being built in 1975 and took till 1982 to complete it, when it was opened by the Queen. And then it took a further, I believe, 18 months, 2 years for it to actually fill up. And it's also a designated international dark sky park. We have quite a famous observatory here now, the Kielder Observatory. So it's a pretty special place. And so as the ospreys think. And how did the ospreys get to Kielder? So obviously I've said they were sort of made extinct in England about 200 years ago. And the birds started to recolonize Scotland. So obviously we're very close to Scotland. And people had seen ospreys flying over Kielder or using it as a pit stop on their way back to their nests in Scotland for a long time. And so it took some sort of forward thinking people within Forestry England to think, well, hang on, let's see if we can attract them here. So what they do, and what we still do, is we erect these nesting platforms. So typically that's one on the right hand side there. So it's like a telegraph pole with these wire constructions on. They're about a metre square, and we don't leave them like that. I just thought I'd put a bare one on so you can see it. And then what they do is they put lots of sort of sticks and twigs. They make it look like a nest that's been used previously, which is obviously quite attractive because the bird then thinks, oh well, that's been used before, it's vacant. But it's been successful, so that attracts them to it. So they build up the nest, and then they quite often splatter white paint on it to make it look like osprey poo. So it looks like ospreys have been there in the past, and that attracts them down. So we've got a number of these platforms around the forest. And in 2008, we had the first nest built, which was amazing, a huge success story. So people ask me, were the ospreys introduced to Kielder? They weren't. They found their own way there, but with a helping hand. So we had this first nest attempt in 2008. They didn't manage to raise any chicks, but then the next year we had 3 chicks fledge, and that was the first ospreys in Northumberland for over 200 years, which is just astonishing when you think about it. And since then we've gone from strength to strength. So from that first nest in 2009, last year we had 6 active nests, and if my maths is right, and apologies if I've got this wrong, I think my adding up is right, that we've had 71 chicks fledged so far, which is astonishing really if you think about it, and what a contribution to the UK population we're making. And then this year again we have 6 active nests. So we have 7 nesting platforms that have been used, but one of the nests hasn't had successful breeding on this year, we don't think. So again, we're in the same situation. We've got 6 active nests. And as I'm recording this, we're right in the middle of sort of eggs hatching, so it's quite an exciting time. So some of the nests have a couple of very young chicks on, and some will just be, eggs will just be starting to hatch now. So I've got this little video to show, which we made a couple of years ago. So a couple of the logos and things are out of date, but it doesn't matter because it's all the information is relevant. So this is just showing what a year in the life of a Kielder osprey looks like. So I'll shut up and let you enjoy the film. It takes a couple of seconds to get going. Okay, so hopefully that was a whistle-stop tour through what the birds get up to through the year, and it always astonishes me how quickly they change from these little tiny little fluffy chicks into sort of quite pterodactyl looking little birds. They look very yeah, like little dinosaurs, and then suddenly it seems, you know, it only takes a few weeks that suddenly they look like proper ospreys, and they're so quarrelsome. And I love that clip in there of when they're learning to fly, and one of them takes off and is helicoptering, and one of the siblings is just watching it like, hey, what are you doing? Can you do that? Can I do that? And it's fabulous to watch them. And yeah, Joanna put together all those clips, and does continue to put clips like that on our blog, which is fabulous, so you can get this insight into the little different behaviors that they do. But anyway, I think that video is great because it just very neatly encapsulates what happens in a year, and obviously it's footage from across a few of our nests across different seasons. Okay, so yeah, so they're migratory. You could see the graphic in that video that showed one of our birds, Blue UV, who had a satellite tracker on him, and it shows the different routes he's taken sort of to and from Kielder, which is really interesting. So they arrive back to Kielder in late March and April, and they leave in late August, September. So they're with us for roughly 5 months. And the ospreys, they head south for the winter. So mostly, we think probably Senegal and the Gambia. So largely West Africa, but we know they do go to places like Morocco, but also southern Iberia. So they are, you know, just, we don't like to say just to Africa because we don't think that's true. So we quite often just say they head to warmer southern climes. And it's an average distance of 5,000 to 6,000 kilometers each way. And they've been clocked at going sort of 320 kilometers a day at 40 kilometers an hour, which is just astonishing when you think of the size of these birds as well. Amazing. So yeah, highly migratory species. They're very nest faithful, typically, because we have a couple of tinkers at Kielder who rewrite the rules a little bit, but typically they'll return to the same nest and the same partner. If unfortunately one of the birds doesn't make it back from migration, which does happen, and we've had that at Kielder where either the male or the female hasn't made it back, they will partner up with another bird. But once they've left their pair and once they've headed back south, they don't meet up with any other birds. They're solitary while they're away, and then when they come back, that's when they repair and they sort of reaffirm their pair bond. Okay, so on osprey projects, it's really important that you can identify the individual birds so you know who you're looking at. So typically in July, once the chicks are the right sort of size and weight, we ring our birds, and we put a blue ring on their right leg, as you can see in that picture on the bottom. So all of the chicks are ringed. They're taken from the nest. They're very placid. They get this ring on them. We sort of sex them, take their weight, that sort of thing. Have a look at them. But it's all done very quickly with minimal disturbance. And very occasionally we fit a satellite tag, as you can see with Blue UV, so that we can understand where they're going, what's happening to these birds. As I say, they're still not necessarily completely safe from persecution, so it's very helpful to understand where they're going and the threats and the hazards that they face. And it helps us to find out over the years where they've been. Blue UV is our superstar, so the bird that was in that video, and he has a satellite tag on him. It doesn't work anymore. It will drop off eventually, but he's still alive and kicking, because he is the first Kielder bird to return to Kielder to try and breed. So he's been really interesting. So not only is he sort of one of the ones that we've tracked the most, we know the most information about his life and where he's been, he's actually the first Kielder-born bird to return to try and breed in Kielder. And he hasn't been successful yet. There's a yet. So that's really interesting. And to me, it's fascinating, because he spent the last couple of years sort of scouting around, and sort of 2 summers ago, he was flying around my local area and looking at other sites. So what an interesting bird. And we only know all of that about him because of his leg ring and also the satellite tag. We also know, for example, that 2 of our males on our nests, nest 1A and 2, are full brothers from Wales, and we wouldn't know that. And that's quite unusual, because typically the males return to the area they were born, like Blue UV come back to Kielder, and the females tend to range a bit further. So that's quite interesting that 2 brothers have taken up residence in Kielder to breed. And with these rings, we can see how our population is contributing to the recovery of the species in the UK. And it also helps sort of when on their overwintering with these rings, we do get reports of such and such bird was seen at this location at this time. We get photographs. Sadly, this year we found one of our birds had perished in Europe, but we know because people can tell us because of the ring. So it's really interesting and helps us understand the population dynamics, and just to understand how they mix and how they spread. So that's why they have rings on. And you can see, I think you can see in this picture, that the young birds have bright orange eyes, but they turn to yellow as they get older. So if you've got bright orange eyes, you typically breed chick. Okay, so if you're visiting Kielder and you want to see them, there are a few sort of top tip locations. So the birds are active all the way through the day and all the way around the lake. But the best locations include Kielder Dam, and then the area from Bull Crag to Leaplish Bay, which is where Kielder Waterside Holiday Park is, and also Baketon Nature Reserve, which is at the sort of the top end, if you like. Dawn and dusk are probably the best times, just after light and just before dark, but they are active all day. And as the chicks get bigger and hungrier, they have to do more fishing to sustain these hungry children. So they do get more and more active through the season. Shallow inlets are quite good places for them to fish, so they can, obviously if it's quite shallow, they can see where the fish are and they go in. So yes, excuse me, so you have to kind of stand and watch for a bit. But I was at Tower yesterday, and one came over my head, within about 5 minutes. So you just need to look up with some binoculars, and you've got a really good. Now we've got so many birds flying around, and especially when the chicks fledge, it's a really, really good time to see them. So we do also have the live camera footage. We have that at Kielder Castle, so that is streaming now to a couple of screens there, and we will soon have it at Tower Now. Northumberland Wildlife Trust have now for a number of years run Kielder Osprey Watch, and unfortunately due to the pandemic last year we didn't do it, and we have unfortunately made the decision not to run it this year as well, for a variety of reasons. Really hope we can be back doing it with you next year, but all is not lost. So the picture that you can see there is a new cabin. So we've moved. So we used to be at Kielder Waterside, and we've moved, or we will be moving, to Tower Now. So this cabin is currently being built. It's just a bare cabin at the moment, but this is going to be our new base, and it's going to be sort of have some great osprey interpretation in it. It'll have some other wildlife information. It's going to have a fully accessible sort of fixed scope. It's going to have screens, so it'll have a screen from the nest that you can see directly across the water. So the reason we've moved is this new nest is much more, it's much closer, it's much easier to see. You can see it through binoculars, you get a really good view through a scope, and it just made sense to go there. To the tower now is kind of the first stop off point for people coming to Kielder, typically the information visitor centre there. So yeah, so we'll be moving to tower now, and thanks to Northumbrian Water for the funding for that, and I look forward to be able to share some more of that with you, certainly from next year. And Osprey Watch is run by volunteers, so we have this fantastic team of volunteers who are just love to share their knowledge of the Kielder Ospreys and everything that goes on, and the wider wildlife of Kielder as well. So hopefully, fingers crossed. I mean, the birds don't care about COVID, do they? They'll still be coming back and doing their thing regardless. But hopefully next year we'll be able to welcome you back to Kielder Osprey Watch. But hopefully we'll be able to have the cabin open one way or another without our volunteers there, but later this summer. So please watch this space, or keep an eye on the Kielder Facebook page for more information. And the best way to keep up to date with what we're doing, what the birds are doing, is our Osprey blog. So that's the address across the top there. Mostly written by Joanna, who, as I say, is just an absolute superstar and keeps us all up to date with everything that's happening. It's got lots of information on there. You can see the tabs across about Kielder Ospreys, videos, Osprey facts, and the timeline. And it's got everything in there that you could ever want to know about our birds and what's happened each season, all that sort of thing. So please do visit the blog, comment, interact with it. We do appreciate your comments and your feedback. And it's just great to be able to share these fabulous birds with people. And I suppose I'd just like to talk a little bit about why Kielder is good for wildlife more widely. So I think there's a bit of a perception that Kielder Forest is just kind of this huge area of single species, dense, dark commercial forestry in it, and it's not entirely true. So at any one point, sort of between a fifth and a quarter of the huge area that we cover is open space, and we've got a wide variety of habitats there. So obviously, yes, there's a coniferous forest, and that's a crop and it's a timber supply, but we have wetlands, we've got quite a big mix of broadleaf woodlands, we've got marshy grasslands. Famously, we've got the blanket bogs, the border mires, and we've got wildflower verges. And forestry practice has really changed across the UK, and Forestry England manage the area very sympathetically for wildlife, for recreation, for leisure. So it's allowed the kind of the change in forestry practice, and opening up the forests for the public has had such wide-reaching benefits for wildlife. So some of the other famous Kielder species, red squirrel. Kielder is home to probably 50% of England's population of red squirrels, and NWT lead a project called Red Squirrels Northern England, which works in partnership to protect red squirrels in the north of England, and obviously in Kielder is a hugely important place for red squirrels. We've got roe deer. Water voles are now back due to the Restore and Ratty project, which we deliver with Forestry England. Sorry, there's foxes, badgers, otters, several species of bats. Goshawk, which is another rare bird of prey. Best time of the year to see them is about March, when they're doing their sky dancing. Otherwise, they're quite hidden away. They stay sort of in the trees, so they're quite hard to see. Crossbill, lots of adders. It's very important for salmon. Obviously, this is the dam, so the salmon can't make it past the dam, but there is a salmon centre at Kielder, run by the Environment Agency, which has done a huge amount of work in helping the salmon population of the Tyne to recover, and really well worth a visit if you get the chance. Really interesting. And they also run a pearl mussel conservation program there, so really interesting, and a wide variety of waterfowl that you can find on the water. And this graphic just sort of tells you when to see wildlife. So that's on the Visit Kielder website. You can find it there. Or you can pause this video because I'm sure it'll be uploaded to our NWT YouTube stream, so you can pause it and just get your head around what's about at what time of year. And where do you want to go and see it? So I mentioned the border mires. There's 58 sites, 10,000 hectares in and around Kielder. And I think peat is just becoming more, people are becoming more aware of the importance of really high quality peat bogs. So Falstone moss is probably the easiest of the border mires to access, and that's between Townhow Visit Centre and Kielder Waterside. There's a walk. It's quite steep, but quite reasonably short, half a mile or so, maybe a little bit longer. And then you're up onto Falstone Moss. And if you look on our NWT our NWT reserves on our website, you'll be able to find out more details of how to go there. And that's really, it's a lovely little compact border mire, and it gives you a real introduction to what these sites should look like. And then combined, the border mires hold more water than all of Kielder Reservoir. So they're just, you know, they're so damp with the sphagnum and everything. And the border mires are one of the reasons that that the Wildlife Trust was established in the first place, you know, 50 years ago, to preserve these really, really important habitats. So well worth a look up. Huge conservation success story. Where else can you see wildlife? Any of the buildings, as I mentioned, I was at Townhow yesterday, and there were house martins and swallows all around my head, all in their nests, feeding hungry chicks. Baketon Nature Reserve is the best place for waterfowl on the reservoir. There's a lot of woodland bird species on the north shore part of the reserve, but everywhere really at Kielder there's wildlife. So not necessarily rare or unusual species everywhere, but there's lots of wildlife. So yeah, just keep your eyes peeled, have a look. You might be surprised what you see. We've got a number of wildlife hides, and they are obviously, with COVID, they've been open and shut. So just check before you go, or ask at the visitor centres if they're open. But there's a hide at Kielder Waterside, which is brilliant for red squirrels, and lots of woodland birds. Baketon Hide, which was constructed in 2017, which has fabulous views over Baketon Reservoir. We've got the Castle Hide, again, that's another good one for squirrels. And if you've got a young family, you can do Gruffalo Trail up to there. There's all sorts of stuff up there, worth a look. And then we have our Ratty Hide on the Forest Drive, which is a bit of a trek to get to, but we're hoping that will in time become a good place to see waterfalls. And this is Baketon Hide, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. But this is a great place to see osprey as well. We've got just off to the left, there's an island, and we did put a nesting pole on this island for osprey, which they've never used, but they do often use it as a perch. So it's worth being there. It's great views if they are perching on there, which they do. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions for me, please do drop me an email at katy.barke@northwt.org.uk. We are always asking for donations to help us support our work with the Kielder Ospreys and to make sure that Osprey Watch can continue into the future. And otherwise, yes, please do get in touch with any questions, and please do come and see us when we can. Thank you.